Welcome to the Empowered to Connect podcast, where we come together to discuss a healing-centered approach to engagement and well-being for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I'm JD Wilson, and I am your host. And today on the show, we've got three members of the Adoptive Triad. It is a powerful conversation, and the first time that we've ever had a birth mom, an adoptive mom, and an adoptee on the show. Now, you will recognize our adult adoptee who is on the show today as Carissa Woodwyk, who has been on. She is a therapist, among 1,000 other things. She has been on as a guest several times before in the past. We love her. She's incredible. So you know Carissa from the show. Tona Ottinger represents our adoptive mom perspective today. You obviously know Tona from Empowered to Connect. And today we are introducing to our followers, but probably not to many of you, Ashley Mitchell, who is at Big Tough Girl on Instagram. She is a birth mom and an advocate for those in the adoption story. And she can be found on Instagram, like we said, at Big Tough Girl. And we had these three on today to have a much needed, powerful conversation about all things adoption, healing, perspective, and all of that. It is a powerful conversation. Grab a notebook, grab some Kleenex, and buckle up for a conversation between the Adoptive Triad. Here they are.
Well, I'm so excited to have two just dear friends on with us today on the ETC podcast for this episode. So Ashley and Carissa, welcome. I am thrilled and honored to have you guys with me today for what I know will be an incredibly impactful conversation for not only our listeners, but actually the three of us as well, because anytime we're together, just our conversations, I think, are just a mutual blessing to all of us. So before we begin, I just say welcome, and why don't we take a few minutes to let you guys introduce yourselves. So Carissa, would you mind going first and just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and maybe what brings you to the podcast today?
Hi, everyone. So good to be back on the ETC podcast. I get to spend my days in a couple different roles. Number one, I'm a mom to a 13 and 11-year-old girl and boy. I'm married and I live in West Michigan. And one of the other roles that I get to step into a lot more since COVID hit is being a therapist. And so I love that I get to sit in this really sacred space with people who invite me into their story and all the hard and all the good that's in each one. So I am a relational person. I love having conversations like this. I love learning. I love laughing. And I love good food and Coke. Coca-Cola, Coke.
Coca-Cola, Coke. I love it. That's right. We best be clear about that. Okay, Ashley, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'm so glad you clarified that, Chris. My name is Ashley Mitchell. I live in Utah. I was born and raised in Utah, and I've traveled all over. I've been very blessed that way. I love to travel. My husband and I have been married 12 years, and we parent two kiddos. Our oldest daughter is 11, and then we have our son that's 9. I also placed a son for adoption. Oh my gosh, in 2022, he'll be 16. So we've been at this for a very long time. He's really amazing. So I get to sit in a space of wife and mom at home. And then I get to sit in an adoption advocate space. That is not what I went to my guidance counselor to do when I was in high school. But it just ended up kind of following me and nagging at me until I stepped into it. And so that's why I am here in this space. We do post-placement services and care nationally for fellow first and birth mothers. And so that's been a really amazing space. But I am just the privileged one to sit with these two wonderful women. This is a very safe space for me to sit in. I've been held more in this space than in many, many spaces. And I'm just glad that we get to do this together again.
I agree. For those of y'all that are listening, Carissa and Ashley and I had the opportunity to be together a few months ago in person and share a similar conversation that we're about to do on the episode. And we got to spend just time together across a whole weekend. And there were so many times that we said, oh, we just wish that we had the ability to record the conversation we just had at dinner, or even just in the car, or walking, or visiting. So really, this is your invitation to just kind of come in and listen with us as we talk candidly and openly as the adoption triad. And we hope that as you listen along, you'll have a tender heart and even a willingness to maybe see some things with a fresh perspective. As Ashley shared, this is a place of a lot of mutual trust and friendship and shared desire between the three of us to move together towards wholeness and well-being. So in essence, we're inviting you to a heartfelt, vulnerable, like back porch conversation, like the three of us sitting around with our feet kicked up, our sacred kind of holy space. I have no idea how long this episode is about to go, but I'm not in a huge rush. So I would recommend maybe getting on something cozy, grabbing a blanket, your favorite beverage. For me, I just literally poured a cup of coffee that is like the size of 3 cups of coffee. So feel free if you needed to hit pause and come back. We're going to go long form and I'm not going to rush us. So Carissa, Ashley, I cannot overstate how much I love both of you deeply. Thank you for the waters we're about to walk into. And thank you for just coming on and being vulnerable and trusting us to hold this space with you. So it's an honor. And Carissa, why don't you start out and just kind of frame up some of our conversation about where we're going to go and kind of why we think it's even important for us to talk about the things we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. You know, just even in your intro, Tona, I think I wish I had the opportunity to have had these conversations so long ago. And one of the things that has happened as I've shared space separately, but together with both of you, is that the heart always wells up. And it's like all the things that I think of in my head sink into my heart. And so I already feel like I could have tears, but mostly, like, as you said, both of you, that it just feels so safe to have these conversations, but so needed to just integrate the parts of all of us that we didn't get to do because we didn't know these conversations were even needed. So yeah, I'm so grateful.
I agree. I just felt the tears come. So maybe we all need to take a minute and go get a tissue.
I know.
Apparently that's what's about to happen. I didn't know that was going to happen today, but I think it might.
Either.
Yeah. I think one of the things that makes this so special, though, that I hope that everyone that's listening can see and feel is the mutual respect for our individual journeys in this space. It's so easy to kind of choose sides and kind of stick to your own corners, but every single person has played a role and has a right and a responsibility in this space. And we walk these parallel journeys. And what we've discovered many times is sitting together is how many of those emotions are so parallel to what we're feeling, and to be able to name them and bring them to light in a respectful space has been it has blown my healing wide open, like in spaces that I could never go if I didn't have people that were walking those parallel journeys. So I just wanted to add the note that regardless of how you're coming to the table and whatever quote unquote side you sit on, that there is a parallel emotion and space and healing that can be done here. And I think it's more powerful than you can get when you're trying to stick to your own guns. I mean, we all have our own stuff we want to fight for, but humbling ourselves in these spaces, holding really tough things for us to hear while acknowledging and embracing that for the other individuals has been really powerful. And these women do that better than anyone in this nation.
Oh, Ashley, that means a lot coming from you, my friend. So thank you for that. Just word.
How lucky.
Say it right back to you.
Yeah. How lucky we are that we found each other.
Yeah. That's the truth.
So we understand that each person and part of the adoption triad has been invited into these deep waters of life in a very unique and specific way. We each carry titles and roles, definitions and stereotypes, secrets and shame, rupture and responsibility, which means we also carry so much potential for healing, for connection, and for creative love. But historically, as we've spent so much time talking about, we haven't talked connection and healing and love within or between the triad. So today we want to start and add to that conversation. The adoption triad has so much more to show and tell the world about goodness and beauty and heart together rather than apart. So as listeners, we're inviting you to name some things with us. We're inviting you to be curious with us. We're inviting you to help us shift into a story that is bigger and fuller and truer than the story we have been telling, both individually and collectively with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate, Carissa, when you just talk about the within and between. I mean, I think that's where we often get stuck a bit, right? Is that we can think about, I mean, Ashley, you said it earlier, just in our own silos, sort of picking our spot and thinking about ourselves. But when we really think about what beauty and hope and healing can happen between us, and how much that impacts what is within us, that we can't actually do the work of within us if we aren't thinking about each of us collectively. Like, what does it mean to be individual and collective, at the same time? Yeah.
Yep. And Ashley will speak a little bit more to us about just the different perspectives that we're bringing individually, but also connected to our part of the triad. But it's been mysterious to me how, even though each of you clearly are not the adoptive parent or the birth parent who were actually in my story, because you carry those titles and represent that person and part of the triad for me, I still have mysteriously found healing in our conversations. So I just want to offer that to our listeners too, is many of us don't have the opportunity or ability to literally have these kinds of conversations with the other two people in the triad. And so you might be thinking, oh, I wish I had birth mom or adopted person or adoptive parent to be talking about this with. But know that if we can enter in and just listen to the other person that's representing that part of the triad, I believe that it can be healing and take us to a more integrated space within ourselves by that representation. So Ashley, can you say something about just...
Yeah, it's been a blessing for me too, as my son's coming into these teenage years, where without bombarding him and burdening him with all of these questions and confusions, and I'm able to go to communities, the adult adoptee communities, and to sit them and ask them and to process and to have them pour into me. It's been really amazing. I have had a lot in reverse of adult adoptees that have come, like Carissa said, that I wish I could hear these words from my birth mother. I can't. You spoke them. Thank you. And it's been a give and take all the way for all sides of this that I have seen in our communities. And I just always encourage, I know it's not always a safe space for people to step up and speak, but when you can, and you can pour into other people without even knowing it, when you speak into your truth and pour into your own truth, people have a chance to receive healing from you that you didn't even know. And it's just powerful. It's really powerful. And I am a better birth mother in my open adoption to my son than I would have ever been if I had not sat in really tough spaces with adoptees. I just wouldn't have. I know that's the case. It's not easy. And I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I know I'm better for him because of it, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, as people, Ashley, might, let's say, overhear our unique voices to our unique part of the triad, can you just say something about maybe what you like or not like as you're not speaking on behalf of all the birth moms out there?
Yes. So it's been interesting if we've stepped into this platform and really been an advocate for our own side to get the post-placement care and all the healing. And one of the greatest lessons that I've learned is that this is my own journey, and I can speak on platforms and advocate for change and reform, but still at the end of the day, it's still just my lived experience. And I know for a fact that there will be individuals in this community that are willing to step in and open up that are not going to be able to relate to everything that I'm talking about and everything that I'm sharing. I mean, my son comes over for sleepovers. It is just so on one end, maybe, that people would never even be able to imagine that that could exist. And I don't share in a space to say you have less than, or that you're not doing it right, or that this isn't. Each one of us have insight and perspective, but it is all at the core of it driven from our lived experience. And so please, please, we ask, when you're hearing the things that we have to share, that always remember that at the heart of it, it's what we've lived and what we've experienced, and take what works and leave the rest because we just can't cover you in all the things that you would need to be covered in. But I hope that there's something that can bless you in this space.
I appreciate you sharing that, Ashley. I mean, I think about how we have our own lived experience. I do think what's unique, and just by way of like encouraging, the two of you guys, is that there is something interesting about how I think the three of us sort of in our own spheres and then thereby collectively have been listening to the voices and the hearts and the needs and the longings of each part of our triad for quite some time. So I totally agree with you that like what we're going to share is personal and vulnerable. Again, it would be our conversation between the three of us from our own lived experience. But I do hope that those listening would at least be willing to think that we do have our ear to the ground a bit, if you will, and bringing some of just each one of our spheres to bear as we kind of go into some of this. So we may make some general sweeping statements and kind of try to explain things with a large banner. So just give us grace as we do that. I'm not speaking on behalf of every adoptive mother or parent. And Ashley, you're not speaking on behalf of every birth parent. And Carissa, you're not speaking on behalf of every adopted person. But I do think collectively we're listeners. And I think we're trying hard to pay attention to this moment in our culture, in our community, with the tenderness and willingness, even if it hurts, to hear from one another and respect and honor each other's perspective. Carissa, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I just was kind of being funny in my own head. I was going to say, but we are watching you all on social media.
Oh, well, that's the truth. There is some truth to that.
We are gathering some data as we scroll. Scroll. Exactly. I'm so with you. And I'm grateful for the conversation because we do have that pulse. We have been listening. We all are learners. And then we are all contributing in specific ways. So, yeah. Okay. So as we know, there are three parts and people to the adoption triad: birth parents, the adopted person, and the adoptive parent or parents. And each of these corners of the triad have carried a label and a name because of a decision and action that happened or was made or happened or made for them. We've been told who we are by the other parts of the triad, and sometimes even by the church. The adoption narrative and culture has defined each of us in intentional and unintentional ways. This narrative has kept us separate and siloed, and perhaps even silenced. The voices from the other parts of the triad have been either too quiet or too loud. And so we've been left alone, figuring out who we are and what we contribute and where we belong. We've often stayed in our own corners, believing what's been said of us, which means that if one of the faces and voices or stories is missing, we don't have a complete and whole story. And for sure, not a story of redemption and goodness. We're each going to share the story that's been given to us. So let us start with birth mom. We haven't really heard from or invited out this corner of the triad. And yet, we all have a lot of thoughts and feelings about the people who represent this part of the triad.
So, Ashley, can you share? Oh, honey, I'm just holding this with you, babe. Can you share some about how the adoption community has labeled and defined, in unintentional and intentional, as Carissa shared, ways? How has the birth parent and family been stereotyped?
So I've been sitting in this since we had our conversation a few months ago, and I'm so glad that I have an opportunity to expand a little bit more on it, because I've been sitting in this question, and I feel like the birth mother floats between villain and victor and victim more than anybody else in the triad. I feel like we I think, wear all the hats, and it 100% comes from who is viewing us and what narrative we've been told. So if I'm sitting in foster care versus domestic infant adoption, I place through domestic infant adoption. That distinction is very important when I come to the table and share, so people know the kind of quote unquote birth mother they're talking to. Okay. Whether we're coming from generational conversation about open versus closed, what kind of birth mom are you talking to? When you're coming through Christian conversation, are you pro-life or pro-choice? What kind of birth mom are you talking to? Am I wearing a cape, or am I wearing the horns this week? I think it's a very complicated space. The problem with this is, as an individual trying to make sense of all of it, it's hard to connect to one specific thing because I feel all of them all the time. I feel like a villain all the time not all the time, but in general, when I listen to adult adoptees and the pain that they're suffering, I feel like a villain a lot. Yeah. But it's important to understand how they're coming to the table. But for birth parents sitting with adoptive parents that haven't done their own work in infertility and that are coming to me, that I gave them this gift and answered all these prayers, then I'm going to be put on a pedestal that I'm never going to be able to live up to. And when I have openness, and I even sit with fellow birth mothers that have closed, that can't understand and are angry because of the comparisons of whose a quote unquote adoption is better or not. So I think for me, and I get really emotional because this is really hard, because I have felt all of those. And I think when I first placed my son, because of the organization that I placed with and my family and the narrative, I felt very much like I was wearing this cape and I did this amazing thing and gave this amazing gift. But as I've sat in my own story and my own grief and loss, that cape's a little tattered and I've had the horns on a little bit. So it's really tough to wear all these different masks, because you have to watch yourself a lot. As a birth mom, I have to watch myself all the time. And depending on the audience I'm sitting knee to knee with, that narrative has to look different. And that is impossible for women to be able to connect with how they really feel when every time they sit with someone new, they look at them differently. There's not this consistent, and I know, Tona, that you'll talk to this, but for the most part, adoptive parents get this savior complex, and it's pretty much a consistent narrative, and I never know which narrative is coming at me. And day to day, depending on my grief, I don't know which narrative I buy into. And so I think in general, the adoption communities I think it's easier to justify adoption if I'm the bad guy, why these children would come into someone else's home if I'm a bad guy. And all the stereotypes that you hear about, drug use or neglect or, all of these things. I think it's easier to paint me as the bad guy so that you can justify or feel okay about pursuing adoption. And so that's, and the other part of that is personally what you believe about yourself. I think birth parents typically sit in so much shame and judgment towards ourselves because of all these mistakes we made that led up to our pregnancy and all these choices. And I can't believe I'm even in this space to begin with. And all of the circumstances surrounding leading us up to not being with our children anymore. We already add enough of our own shame to ourselves. We don't need it from everybody else. So I think it's tough. I think we float through a lot of it. I think more and more the narrative around birth parents is to try and shape them as these amazing selfless heroes. The propaganda is one or the other. Either she didn't want them, and so we were able to step in and help them, or she loved them so much that she gave them to someone else. And neither of those connect. Neither of those make sense for me. And so we float in this narrative in the middle all the time of what is true, what is our actually true story, and can we fill both and, because I switch back and forth all the time.
So Ashley, can I ask you, it feels like when you say that you can step at any moment into any one of those roles, the villain, the victim, the victor, it's like the adoption community specifically is still trying to tell you who you are. And what I know about you is that you just want to be you.
Yeah, I think right now when birth parents are so quiet, I think they're quiet in their own isolation and their own shame. But I also think they're so quiet because they don't want to be used for other people's narrative to fill whatever gap they need them to. And so if adoptees have a gap, if adoptive parents have a gap, and however they're feeling, they need someone to plug in, I'm the easy target. I'm typically not present. I typically obviously made some sort of decision that led me to not be with my children. I'm an easy person to plug in depending on what the others need. And so it's easier for us to just stay out of it and not be, and just basically, it's almost like we're proving everybody right because we can't speak our own space and our own truth. And so however you view me is going to be right based on whether I can be present or not. But I just always am like, any single person is one choice away from being exactly where I was. And
you know what I'm just thinking of right now? It's like I'm thinking this because it's happened to the adopted person too. It's like even though we might be starting to listen to your voice, we're actually only allowing your story to start at your pregnancy. And there was a whole story before that.
So
we're starting the narrative and then the role, let's say the victor villain, Victor, we're actually placing that title on you from that part of the story. And I get that because, right, my story started not
your story started at birth, at my pregnancy. My worlds didn't collide with prospective adoptive parents until the moment of pregnancy, until the choice to pursue adoption was made or relinquishment took place. And so we forget that I had this whole life experience before I came to the table in this space where all of you connected to me. And so I needed to fill the gap in whatever way that connection took place. And it doesn't, and so many people forget this whole life of underlying issues and things that took place before I even got here. And so however I show up through pregnancy and after is all you've got of me.
Ashley, when you were sharing, first of all, I just was feeling so much with you, and feeling and thinking so much about how, again, the adoptive parent is so in control of those messages and messaging and narrative. And I wonder, and maybe y'all can speak to this. Do you feel like this rings true? I was thinking, I have mixed, and I'm saying I like adoptive parent, I have mixed feelings about birth mom, because when I think about birth mom through my eyes, I maybe need a villain. When I think about birth mom through my adopted child's eyes, I might need a victor. Like, I think the adoptive parent tells different stories about you. Mm-hmm. Also, depending on who we're talking to, we're code switching our own story that we have produced about birth, parent, family, mother, based on if we're talking to ourselves or our kids. Do you think that's true? Does that feel right to you?
Just in my own experience, Derek and I, my son, we're almost 16 years into this, and we had no relationship at the beginning because of my own grief and trauma and not being able to be present, and then stepped into this space of rebuilding trust and reconnecting and getting to know each other into him being old enough and allowing him to have whatever kind of relationship he decides that he needs to have with me. I will just say for myself, and from what I've seen, I know 100% that the only reason why my son had room to decide if he wanted a relationship with me or not was how she talked about me to him.
Right. Yep.
And I don't know, I can't speak to this because I wasn't in those sacred conversations that was not, I am sure, I think as parents, we want to protect our kids. We want to protect our kids, and adoption comes with a whole mess of stuff that hurts our kids. And I know that Derek was hurt by many, many things and choices that I made. So as we try and give back to him what was taken, how that narrative is given to him matters immensely, and whether he wants anything to do with me or not. And that can shift and change as he grows. But for now, the story that's told about me dictates whether I get to be present or not, if I want to be, or if I can be, or if I'm healthy enough to be. You get control over whether I would think, and Chris, I would love to, whether the child is given permission to do that based on what I'm talked about, how I'm talked about. And if your insecurity about me, Tona, as the adoptive mother is so threatening, and there's so much insecurity and fear around me, I'm never going to have a space, even if I want one.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Go ahead, Carissa.
From my experience, as I listen to you both talk, it really goes along with how our American culture often operates, that all or nothing. And anybody who knows me knows I always talk about the both and. But if you're trying to help me as the adopted child to understand a person and role of my birth parent, and I never forget that there's a birth father too, even though we don't talk about birth fathers as much. But you tell me she loved you so much that she, right? In my day, we said, gave you away. Now we say, placed you for adoption. She loved you so much. And so you want desperately for us to have you wear that victor cape. And yet here I am wondering as I grow, wait, she loved me so much that she didn't keep me? That is really hard to make sense of. And still in my 40s, that can be really hard to make sense of. I know we're all learning that it's less about making sense of and less of feeling what we're sensing. And yet at the same time, to hear the Christian community, especially, that has been the sphere I've circled in, that how could a mother do this to her child, right? And so in a way it names the question I have inside of, right? And still as an adult, how could you not have done everything you could have to fight? So there's the villain cape, right? And so I'm trying to make sense of, wait, was she a good woman or was she a bad woman? Because all I know is that woman, for my generation a lot, is not even in my life. And so victim, but as I grow, the victim cape of imagining what my birth mom went through now as I've had children to make that decision, right? And so the compassion, the empathy, the curiosity of what was going through. So as you name that today, that you, depending on which narrative you enter into, could be all three of those words. I feel that with you, of just being the adopted person, of having to switch when needed in my own story, switch those capes for you. That's hard. And I would even say,
maybe just a victim, really, at the end of the day, of all of it, the systems that created the issues, victim of my own mess and choices and unresolved stuff from my own stuff, and victim. I mean, maybe at the end of the day, I just don't really, it's all encompassing, I guess, really, because I really do feel deeply to the core that I believe that my son looks at me as a loving person, but also that harmed him, but that also was taken advantage of in certain situations. Like he looks at me now because he's had an opportunity to sit with me, and as he gets older, and he's still so young, but starting to, because of our openness, be able to expand. Maybe it was all of it. Why does it have to be one or the other? Maybe it just is all of it. Yep. And that both and we've been learning and sitting in so much more than we've ever done before. And I don't know if that's easier or harder for him and I to sit in the both and, but it's more honest for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we'll get to it, but there's the part of me, as you were naming today, the three words that could describe you. I'm like, you know what? I mean, as you're talking, I'm like, I actually feel like I could fit in all three of those words.
Well, let's just go there, Carissa. Do you mind? Because I was just about to say, why don't you share how you feel like the adoption community's defined and labeled you? So how are you resonating with that idea of victim, victor, and villain?
Yeah, I mean, so I believe that the general narrative for us is look at this sweet, innocent baby, right? We know that we can peer into a soul through each other's eyes. And what do we see on every advertisement or brochure or pamphlet or commercial? It's those big, sad, forlorn, desperate, lonely eyes that we use to capture our hearts, right? So to me, immediately, we have defined that baby as a victim of someone else's choice, right? Where we've even defined that as a bad choice. And so we're already starting as those little baby pictures as a victim who's helpless, powerless, voiceless, right? So I think that for sure, our listeners, I'm sure, can understand why we play that or step into that victim role. For me, I'll just say the villain first. What we've come to understand about the impact of relational rupture and trauma and all of the impact of that, our brains and bodies and hearts, and giving permission for all the behavior and emotional challenges that those of us who have been adopted can experience, and watching parents ache and grieve and be mad and sad at how their child is participating in their home and how hard it is, how awful it is, right? We know parents have said, I don't know if I should have adopted this kid. We know parents who have said, I'm going to disrupt this adoption, and have, again, sent them back to whoever. And so as our brains and bodies work out our trauma, we can so be that villain of just causing problems in our home, causing problems relationally. We're not attaching, we're avoiding. We don't want your love because that's scary, right? So there is this whole narrative, as I was thinking about the 3 words, that we're the villain too. Like, we're these bad kids who got messed with at the beginning, and why can't they just be normal functioning kids? But then the victor part for me is from my own experience of when I've gone and spoken at different events. I mean, I literally remember this sweet woman coming up to me and she goes, "Oh, honey, you turned out so good." And so for those of us who are using our voice and are old enough to make sense of and process and piece together, now we're this beautiful victor who made it through the impact of being relinquished / given / placed, to going through all the impact that had on our brain and bodies growing up. And we actually turned out and are really good people. And we're put on display at conferences and events. Like, look at how beautiful her story turned out. Oh, the ashes did become beauty. And so I'm not dismissing any of that. You can hear my sarcasm in some of that because I have that kind of story, right? And so there's the moment that we can put on this victor cape too. So I'm just piecing all that together in the language that the 3 of us have come up with. And so it's pretty confusing. And you know that everybody's looking for, well, I would say, I don't know what you guys would say, everyone's trying to make sense of this fractured, but yet really human story. And so if we can put these labels on each other and define versus describe what happened, right? We're defining the person versus describing what happened. Man, we can sure sell that kind of story. So I think we started as that sweet, innocent baby. She needs love. She needs care. She needs protection. She needs a home. She even needs Jesus. And so we could be the parents who give this to her, because look at birth parents didn't give it to her. But when you position someone to be the people who show them and give them and provide love, because it's going to be better, it's going to be safer, it's going to be less uncomfy, right? I think that gives that position and person of the triad a lot of power. But then we have this pressure as adoptees to perform, to please, to perfect, but yet we're dysregulated, we're detached, we're disruptive, or maybe both at one time or the other. We know we're insecure. And those of us that turned out to be the good kids are just socially more acceptable, but I don't think it means that trauma didn't affect us any differently. But then we're grateful, but then we're resentful. We're connected, but we're not we're searching, we're hiding. And then we're just like in the technology where we're just so pissed and we're just bleeding all over the internet. Yeah. So that's where we've come from, into this victim, into the villain, into the victor at times, but back to the villain, because now we are finding our voices and we're messing with your roles, guys.
Yeah. You're kind of flipping the script on us a little bit.
Well, I hear that that's a hashtag.
Yeah. Well, and when you talk about those newborn babies, let's get them away from the birth parents before they can screw them up too much, because they already are making poor choices, and we have a clean slate because we haven't dealt with our insecurities and our infertilities and all of our stuff. So we get this newborn baby that we can mold into our own child. And none of that connects because there's still that trauma and separation. And birth parents' grief shows up in random, horrible ways. And the adoptive parents are going, what did you do to them while you were pregnant that's making them not connect with me and love me? And the adoptees are constantly having to perform and maybe perform for their birth parents too. I don't know how. I feel like I have to perform for Derek. He comes over and my house is never cleaner, ever, ever, ever. He doesn't care, but it is like spotless when he comes over, because I need to make sure that I'm not the narrative of the villain for him, so he can come over into this beautiful space. But he probably feels like he has to show up and be this good kid, that I made the right decision by placing him for adoption. And so he's okay because I want my mom to be okay, and not feel guilty about her choice. Oh my gosh. And all that pressure on that child, my kid growing up.
Well, I think that you say something that all three of us have talked about. We all three carry so much pressure.
Yep.
From the other part of the triad.
Yep.
We just do. And you just named it, Ashley. Yep. Tona, I'm curious, as you have been so willing always to listen to our roles and our part of the triad. What do you feel like the adoption community, how have they kind of defined and labeled and maybe sectioned off you, the adoptive parent?
I appreciate some of the nuance y'all brought to the conversation today, and sort of thinking about all three of those words. And I've had a few thoughts as I've jumped around the three of those, just thinking about that particular position as adoptive parent. But yet, Victor really is the primary one, that at least from a stereotype outside of myself, I have a whole lot of different feelings about how I see myself, which I think y'all both said. Yeah. And we can talk about that in a few minutes. But in terms of how the community or culture, would define the particular role of adoptive parent, I mean, y'all know it's the savior, the rescuer, the person that is, if you're in a Christian faith, like embodying the gospel through adoption. I mean, it's that picture painted that we are the ones that go in and save the hurting and redeem and restore. I mean, these very, strong verbs that carry like so much just savior mentality.
Yeah.
And we are the hero of the triad from the culture side, especially when, Carissa, you talked about like the images of how the children are painted. So when there is, forgive me for just speaking generally, the sad, hungry, downtrodden pictures all over the place, the poor children that need love, if not me, then who? Well, yes, let me do that. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but
Yes.
that is that call to action is so, it's nuanced and quite confusing, but when someone steps towards it, it's like, the first step towards adoption. There's a little bit of a different thing going on through if you're adopting through infertility, like that has, I want to say that even if we don't get to speak on it, I want to give voice that's a little bit of a different narrative.
Yeah.
But even still, a family that's dealing with infertility can choose to be parentless. So even in the act of choosing adoption out of a place of infertility or out of a place of having biological children and just desiring adoption or foster care or whatever, when we take that action, just give me the cape. I mean, that's what happens. Like, don me with the crown, hand me, the trophy, and give me the cape. We are painted and step into, look, I shared this when we shared at that conference. Like, we were in a room of mostly adoptive parents. And I said, come on, y'all. Like, we all do want to be the hero of every story. I mean, that's just human nature. So I am not saying that in any way to like make anybody feel a lot of like covered up in shame. I'm just saying it's human nature to want to be the hero of the story. Like, so as the adoptive parent, we are given the opportunity in this very external, outward facing, culturally acceptable way that is highly cheerleaded to be the victor of a human being's story. I mean, y'all, that is something. That's all I'm going to say. That is something, and it's something big. So culturally, we're the victors. I think y'all may have some response. I'd love to get back to like how I actually feel inside, which is not like a victor. But Ashley, do you have something like what's stirring in you as you hear me say that? Because I'm guessing there's something, my friend. What's in you?
Just the biggest thing for me, just from my lens, is that it's always look at all these poor children, and there's no mention to the equal amount of poor parents. I mean, I don't know where we went, but we weren't in the pictures that were being taken. So,
seriously, let's just sit with that a minute.
It's just such an easy place to elevate you. And
yes,
those adopted parents that are pursuing domestic adoption exclusively have a financial means that this classist system that puts them above in a lot of places anyway. But it's so easy to highlight all these poor children because of their trash parents.
I mean, for real, the absentee.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the child is absent.
Well, these children
familiar tied photographs.
These orphan children, even though I'm alive and well in the hospital room next door. I mean, I'm an easy thing to eliminate when we can. And I'm not saying that there's not great heart in serving the children. And I'm not saying that there isn't a need to step into those spaces. I'm not. So please don't hear what I'm not saying. But let's acknowledge that these children came from somewhere.
Well, can I say that as I've really thought a lot about the church the last year and a half.
Yeah.
And I'm coming from growing up in an evangelical Christian kind of environment. We have taught what to do more than we have taught how to be. And so when we see the advertisements, the pictures, the eyes, without the birth parent, it is an easy, I know what to do now to help this kid. We have not taught and for sure not practiced how to be in relationship with people whose stories differ than ours.
Yes.
And I think that that's why it took off, because it's just an easy task. I mean, we didn't know it wasn't going to be so easy, but it's an easy solution to a problem that will make us good people, because there's shame, right? We don't know that we're good no matter what we say or do yet. So if I can lay out how much to tithe, how much to go to church, where to learn my Bible verses, how to take care of a child who doesn't have one or both parents, then that's so easy. And then we probably gave money in the offering plate to support people like birth parents, right? Because then that was a task, that was a solution, rather than figure out how to have relationship that's messy and hard and going to require grace and compassion. So anyway, I'm just thinking, having those thoughts about the bigger picture of, I think sometimes how our church culture has set us up to look at those pictures and why it worked for so long.
I mean, I'm like high-fiving you and amening you through the screen. I mean, I deeply resonate with everything you just said, which brings me to even some of that nuance of like, okay, so, for whatever my motivation was, which they're mixed and they're different for every single one of our, children. Like our motivations, thereby our expectations as we built our family was very, very different with each kiddo. But what is true is that the pedestal was laid out and you step up on it as the adoptive parent. And through that doing, like you talked about, Carissa, like doing that thing that's the good and right thing to do. And then there are so many expectations that come away. And here's what we know. And this is just any, adopted parent that's listening to me, y'all know that when the rubber meets the road day in and day out, you are nothing more than a human being trying to parent. Like you are the victor of no story up in your own house. Like we know the truth of like what it actually does mean to be in relationship with our children. And I can promise you, not a single one of my kids sees me as the victor of their story. I mean, they see me as their, as someone that is attempting to parent them. And sometimes that's going well. And sometimes it's not. But, I do not want to speak on behalf of you at all, Carissa. And I don't even want to speak on behalf of my kids, but I'm confident they don't see me as a victor. I have some of those other roles in my mothering. I mean, it's not perfect parenting. And I don't want my kids to see me as the victor of their story. And I don't want their birth parents to see me that way.
Yeah.
So that whole victor mentality, it breaks down.
And when a parent or parents bring their children home and you're parenting them like you have, it's requiring relationship of you, right? Yep. And that takes the victor, villain, victim totally out of the story. And now what? We have to have relationship. We have to learn what attachment means and looks like. We have to co-regulate. We have to heal. Right. And we
have to be, as you said, not do.
Yes.
We have to be with. And being with requires us being more nuanced and being willing to sort of even be in relationship with them in a nuanced, connected way. That the title of victor is, I mean, some of our kids are kind of sassy and they'll know, where I'm going or what I'm doing or who I'm talking to and give me a little lip about it. Oh, Mom, you're going to go talk to those people about saving all those babies. I mean, because they know the story that's being portrayed. And they also know that I didn't say, here's the thing. If I have some choices as an adoptive parent, we have a lot of power. We are often given the microphone. We have power over, y'all said it earlier, the stories that we tell our children about their birth parents. We have so much power, and we actually also create harm. I am parenting my children as a human, which means that sometimes that's creating this lovely, connected, healing environment. And sometimes it's jacking them up because I'm just a person parenting. So does that make sense to y'all? I mean, y'all are moms, you may rock it tonight at dinner, or you may crash and burn tonight at dinner. And us adoptive parents, we might think we want to be the victors, but at the end of the day, that's just a facade. It's a facade.
Well, it's got to be.
We don't know. We don't know what we're doing.
It's got to be so confusing. It's got to be so confusing as the adoptive parent to have been set up with this narrative, you in this role as victor, and then bring your child home and have that all disintegrate.
Oh yeah, absolutely no idea what we're doing. Literally no idea what we're doing. The question then becomes, oh my gosh, I need to parent. There's this expectation of parenting so that birth mother won't be disappointed that she picked us. I cannot tell you how many times it's just the truth. I'll be standing in my kitchen. I'll lose my cool. And the thought that it's like birth mom, sometimes birth dad, mostly birth mom, is always with me. And the thought crosses my mind, oh, if she saw me raise my voice at her sweet baby, she'd be so disappointed it was me parenting. We are fighting our own doubt and self-doubt. Ashley, you're always with me. You're with me when I'm failing and feeling shameful, usually. Your voice of judgment, which isn't true. Come on, that's just not true. But that's our own insecurity. We're trying to put on a front as not to disappoint you, that you picked us in some situations, or that your child ended up in our care if it's intercountry adoption. It's crazy.
Yeah. And, Carissa talked earlier about the pressure, that pressure on the adoptive parents. You pursued this, you fundraised for this, your church supported you, you had all this given to you. You can't have just a parenting moment because what a gift you've been given that you have to be grateful for. And so you don't get to be human in your parenting very often without the guilt attached to it, I would think.
I think that's interesting. I was with a mom this weekend that they are parenting a little pumpkin that's got a lot of medical needs. And he did come to them through adoption. And I just said to her, I was like, honey, I know that there was a choice in this decision that y'all made to build your family this way. And I'm going to be the voice that tells you, even in your choice, you can have a hard time. You can say this is hard and this is a lot. And she just literally started weeping because we don't know that we can struggle even if we took the step of action. We can have a parenting moment, like you said, Ashley.
And you have to be above and beyond what I could have ever provided.
That's right, honey. We got to show you up. That's just the truth. That is going through our mind.
More love, more time.
We've got to be better than. Yes. It's exhausting and it's unnecessary, but it is part of what the whole stage is set for that to sort of be what is expected of us, both as a culture and then also definitely some personal expectations. Carissa, did you have a thought about that?
Well, I was just going to just bring a little cohesion to this part as we've talked about, like how we have been positioned in the triad. And I want to say this, like, as you listen to each of our parts, again, the three of us have been talking about this for years, but if you're new, it's got to be a lot to listen to. And probably a lot of this has been hard to listen to. So we just want to acknowledge that for those who are just entering into this kind of conversation. But what we do hope that you take in and continue to think about, just kind of let it marinate in. If it's not truth for you, it's not truth for you. But we hope that at least you can see in this part of our conversation that the adopted person, the birth parent, the adoptive parent, we have been siloed. We have been sectioned off from one another. We have been separate from one another. And we've kind of been we've either stayed in our little corner of the triad, or we've been pushed into and made to stay in the little corner of our triad. So listening to what the voices in that part of the triad are saying, what their tears are about, what they're shouting about, what they're screaming about. But for sure, and the birth parent is just coming into this, but you'll see it on the internet because we are all trying to figure out who we are, what our voices are trying to say, what we need. But I hope that you can hear for each of us. We didn't really name it so specifically, but I think for all three of us, there's shame, there's sadness, there's mad, there's fear. But mostly from this part of the conversation, we want you to know that if we are supposed to together write a collective story of goodness, truth, beauty, grace, redemption, if one of the voices or stories or faces is missing, we don't have a complete story. And so we just would encourage you to think about, what are the faces and voices and stories that you've been listening to? And what face or story or voice do you need to add to the bigger story of your adoption story? So we've named some of the expectations that we feel like are placed on us. I think we've talked a little bit about our own expectations of ourselves. Just, I guess, to say how we have actually lived from, right, these expectations unknowingly, maybe knowingly. But I think that the three of us all agree that it's time to bust out of these titles and roles and definitions and stereotypes and secrets and shame. Because that story, we think it needs to be pitched. Just pitch that story. But at the same time, we need this story, right? It'd be easy to just throw that out and start over. But part of what we want to challenge you with is the belief that we actually need this story. We need the problematic story to help us know what to do, where to go, how to relate, where to return, what to surrender, and most importantly, how to reimagine. So yes, the problem is actually part of the solution. The problem can actually lead us to knowing the possibility that the story holds and guide us to finding solutions that bring relational repair and healing. Solutions that could shift this shitty story into something worth telling and talking about.
Yeah.
So we're story shifters. And we're inviting you to be story shifters with us. Tona, do you want to talk a little bit about reclaiming. So if these are the parts, the hard parts we're talking about, maybe we'll just start with you and kind of go backwards. What words would you use to reclaim our natural roles, but maybe just our original humanity?
Yeah, I think that's it. It's like we need to go back to the very, very beginning, right? Because that's a good place to go. Back to the start. I mean, I appreciate you just marking that. I do think across all of our, parts of the triad, there's the shame piece. And just thinking about specifically the role that I play as adoptive mom and what I would want to reclaim there. And I find myself, and it's just been within the last couple of years, sometimes it's important to like hear yourself talk. Like, what word am I using a lot? Because that's something I can pay attention to. And I have just been using the word human. Like, I'm just a human. Like, I just want to be okay. Like sometimes doing well and sometimes not doing well. Like, I want to be okay, like pursuing relationship without all of these other expectations and layers that might come with that. I want to be okay making sense of my own past and story and history. Like, I want to be okay coming into this relationship, my kids or one of my kiddos, like just being me and not having to do anything to like fix them. This isn't about like, that's what I want to reclaim. I want to reclaim this idea that, there's that maybe sometimes we're told our kids are broken and we have to fix them. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want the responsibility to fix anyone or heal anyone. Like, I want to be in relationship, reimagining and coming up with something beautiful and new together as all three parts of the triad. Like, I don't want Ashley not there. Like, Ashley's always there. Ashley, you're always here. You're always in my home. You're part of what is happening between, myself and our kids. Like, you are here with us. And so giving room to like reclaim that is not a place of threat. Like, that is not a place of fear. There's room for all of us to be here together. Like, and I don't have to be threatened by you because I'm okay just being me. Like, just letting myself be who I am and what role I play in the lives of my kids, knowing that whatever it is enough and it's not too much, which I often feel like I'm too much because I'm a lot. But so I want to reclaim like just being, apologizing, repairing, being in relationship in my relationship with my kids and leaving room for the other parts of the triad and being in relationship with birth family, however that plays out in different situations, and leaving room for them. So reclaiming humanity, both and being. That's where I am. Yeah.
I appreciate that, Tona.
Yeah.
I think that in all the years that I've known you, that's exactly what you brought to the spaces that we've shared together is your humanity. And again, like we talked about before, even though you're not my adoptive mom, hearing an adoptive mom say and own, here are things that I thought, here are ways that I believed. And at the same time, I'm finding that my own story impacts my kids' story.
Yeah.
And just being really, really human about your gifting, but also the hard things. And so I needed to hear what was inside of you, even the hard things that I had to hear you say throughout the years about parenting, about the unexpected, about the surprise of what entered into your home. So I'm just grateful always. I feel like you are someone who's always had the courage to be really honest and human.
Well,
And I
thank
love
you.
that I've got to. Yeah.
I appreciate you and the safe space you've created in our friendship to let that just be what it is, on both sides, like just letting it be.
Well, it's one too mucher who gets the other too mucher.
I know. Come on, girl. That's the truth.
And then we found this Ashley. And okay, Ashley, how about for you? Just word or phrases, or maybe even a specific action that could just help your specific part of the triad, your role, and in relation and connected to us. Just words or phrases or specific things that would help reclaim.
Yeah. Tona and I had the same thing about but from my perspective, being seen as not a threat to your existence, to threaten your idealistic view of family. If you don't know, you adopted. So that's already shifted a little bit from culturally what we would view as family. And so it's okay to evolve into this new view and realistic dynamic of what your family looks like and that unique family dynamic. And I think that allows us to release this sense of ownership over a child and allow for relationships between all of the pieces. I think adoptive parents and birth parents get in this really tough tug of war over ownership when we feel like that's threatened, and there's space for both and a need for both for our child. And our job as the parents in these spaces is to give back and pour into the child, to allow that child to be or feel or express whatever they need to. And when we release ownership, I think we create a whole lot of space, more than we've ever done before. For my son, I want to own harm that was caused. I want to own my humanity of a mistake over shame of a choice. I want him to know that it was not him, but a circumstance that created this space, and not him as a broken person, or even me as a broken person, but just choices. But I can own the harm that was caused, and that I offer love to him, not in maybe a space that he's ever felt about love with me because of the narrative attached, but a love that comes from a space and a healed and safe space that wants to invite him in for me to give back whatever I can or whatever he would allow me to. For my fellow birth parents, birth mothers specifically, to let go of this good or bad narrative and just accept choice as it is. And how do we move through that into a healing space? I long for our communities to know that we long for our children. I long for our communities to know that we are a whole person and not just a specific narrative that you sit with us in. And I long for the women to be able to find their own truth in more wholeness instead of the bits and pieces that are being fed to them, so that they can. I think it's impossible for any of us not to heal, like Carissa said, without this wholeness of this narrative. And but women need to know how they feel about themselves and their own choices before they can step into any of these spaces. And I want them to understand all the pieces of that. I don't know. I just, more than anything for my son, he's an amazing kid. He's an amazing kid. And we've been privileged to sit in so much grace and respect and understanding and apology and truth and authentic it's just, and I know that will shift and change and evolve, but I think we've laid a foundation that will allow room for that to become whatever it's going to be. And I know that for me, I hope that it continues on the path that it is, but that also, I can't allowing myself to release that expectation and that pressure on him to be able to still evolve with him. But yeah, that's how I want to be seen, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, Carissa, how about you? Do you have something to add in terms of thinking about reclaiming our roles?
Just a few lighthearted things that just flew into my mind. I had to get a pen out.
Bring them to us, sister.
When I think about my own journey, but then the collective adoptee journey, what I would advocate for is that we would reclaim our original goodness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That our story actually started with beauty, that we were a delight from moment one. And as we enter this adoption conversation, we're so defined by birth parent and adoptive parent's narrative from moment one. So for me, it's the holy act of reclaiming that our story, our life started with goodness. So that just came to me. Also, reclaim. I'm a word person. You know this. I don't know how to say this poetically, but we often use the language. I hear adoptees speak this over ourselves, and I hear it spoken about us, that we are broken.
Yeah.
And so I want to reclaim. I actually want to just throw out that word. None of us are broken. But we all have been impacted by brokenness, right? We all have places that are fragmented inside because none of us had a perfect parent raising us. So I would reclaim that usage of the word broken, of defining versus describing what happened. But also I would say I want to reclaim, my last thing here, is that I have the ability and the agency to create a safe, healing space for my own healing. That I get to be a compassionate, courageous person for myself. Now, here's the balance, I think, the tender balance in that I can create and practice and offer that to myself. Because perhaps I didn't feel like I got that from birth parent or adoptive parent. But at the same time, I have to be so mindful that I can also believe that I need to do that by myself. And that I was given relationships, perhaps with my families, perhaps with friends, but also to experience that intimacy and connection and healing with other people, that I would say in my experience with adoptees as clients, that all of us learn that we don't need other people. And so I want to reclaim that original design that we were made to be in relationship with other people. So those are the three things I would just told you they were lighthearted.
You know, Carissa, I'll just say one of the biggest gifts of our friendship over the last decade has been that part of you that has helped. It's almost, I would say, given me permission to set aside that word that we're broken. I mean, that was something that I desperately needed, just not as an adoptive mom, but like just as a woman, to be reminded of that original goodness, and that I don't have to sort of own and claim and banner that word broken over myself or my children or in this conversation. our birth families or our circumstance, our situation. So I want to say to you, sort of thank you for embodying the reclamation of that word, if you will, setting that aside and saying that is not, we don't have to operate out of thinking about ourselves as broken, but we can see ourselves as beautiful and impacted by brokenness. So that has been truly, I mean, I'm not just saying this because we're on, this call together, the three of us, but I can say with integrity that gift of our friendship has absolutely revolutionized everything about how I see myself and human beings and people and my children and scripture and my relationship with Jesus. Every single bit of everything has been impacted by that paradigm shift. And so I affirm you and appreciate you and thank you for just letting me walk alongside you in friendship. And it's deeply impacted me. And I think it's why we can sort of, if you will, set the table for this conversation. Because I am not trying to decide which one of us is more broken.
Yeah.
I am not asking, is Ashley more broken than me, or am I more broken than Ashley, or is Chris, who's broken here? That comparison has been set aside. And it's oh, no, we are all beautiful. We've all had impact and experience, and we are all doing the best we can at any given moment to do whatever we need to do to take care of ourselves and others in that moment. And so what hope and grace and possibility is birthed in that kind of way of seeing one another.
Yeah. And we get to that because, like you both said, these are huge words that were just said in this part.
Yeah.
Being human, owning.
Yes.
Which allows us, I think, to connect and heal together. Right? If we actually give ourselves permission to be human, we have the ability and courage to own let's just say how brokenness impacted our stories. And the moment we can own that, and I would say sit in the heart of that, grieve that, and then reimagine what can come because of that. It's huge.
Yeah. It is. Ashley, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I have lots, but I think maybe too tender to share other than just from the lens that we view each other, we talk about bringing that humanity back, just in what a space that gives us room to really see each other and love each other and find the beauty and blessing in these circumstances over the punishment and nitpicking. And I think that's important. I don't think we've ever sat in spaces where it wasn't about dishing out, punishment and who's had it worse. Or I think that for the first time, that narrative allows just love and humanity and blessing to come out. And I don't think we've left a whole lot of room for that in this space.
Mm. Yeah.
I think that's why this conversation has the potential to pave a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
To just name exactly what you said, Ashley, what hasn't happened. So, Ashley, I appreciate the honesty of you saying that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I feel like has been a gift and worked for the three of us as we listen to each other is to say, okay, so I hear that's where you're at, and I'm going to stop and be here with you in that space. But I'm not going to ask you to be someone or someone you're not, someone or somewhere you're not. Because that's what feels honoring, right? So as birth parents, birth moms tell us, man, that's hard to hear. Because we've had a story scripted about us for a long time, for too long. And so Tona and I just want to model the kind of people in your life that say, we're standing right here with you in that space. But what I think that the power of our conversations together today and previously has been the pause.
Yeah.
Because we know in our left brains, we could go for a lot longer in a lot of different conversations.
Yeah.
But we've learned, some people have taught us about our left and right brains. So let me say this to kind of, Ash, did you want to say something, Tona or Ashley, before I kind of bring us to a close?
Well, I just want to sort of maybe even say, like, as we're, kind of wrapping up and Carissa, you give us some like closing thoughts and some things to consider as we move forward. I feel like it's important for me, in this conversation of the triad as the adoptive parent to sort of just collectively say, like, really in just a spirit of apologizing and just with just not just humbly, like, so much of that siloing and silencing and separation has happened at the hand of the adoptive parent. And so much of that narrating and storytelling is really is ours. And how can we just own that together and apologize and be where we are. And I think that's what's important about this moment right now, like in this exact conversation. Like, it's time for us to sort of love one another well enough to let this be enough for today. But it's okay to sort of just step back and like look at where the larger cultural narrative is right now. Like, and whose turn is it to talk, and who needs to be listened to, and who needs to step back. And, we need to be paying attention to you, Ashley, as the adoptive, parent and the adopted person, and let that birth parent have some opportunity to be heard and listened to and seen and in the fullness of your humanity, not at the moment when you gave birth and made me a parent, but the totality of all of who you are. And so I just like want to honor that and just be okay being right where we are right now, the three of us together as sort of a teeny tiny little bitty microcosm of this much larger cultural triadic relationship that, that is both micro and macro in all kinds of interesting and confusing and confounding ways, Yeah. So I see you today, friend, and I appreciate you in this coming on and being with us. Yeah.
This conversation, it really, there's so much hope in it for me. Even if this is as far as we are and we're meeting each other where we're at and not forcing to go where we're not,
Yeah.
I think there's hope of the possibility on the other side of this conversation. We know the work that we've done and how far we've come, and we've been able to name things. It is my hope that people get to find people like you to sit in spaces in, to hold each other and to be seen by each other. And, that if someone approaches you and wants to sit in that space with you and you can hold them, that you'll leave that light on for them. But I feel like it's so easy to get discouraged and feel like we haven't accomplished a whole lot. But this conversation today feels like we've accomplished a lot. Mm-hmm. And we've come a really long way. And it feels like possibility on the other side of meeting each other where we're at. And that keeps the work going. And I'm just I'm glad to rest in that.
Rest. That's what we could do. We can rest.
And pause.
Let's do
let's
that.
Put our own adoption pause in the midst of the great pause that our country has been gifted with. So maybe our own individual movement forward is both dependent on and connected to one another's movement. And in this collective movement, a story of relationship will be pieced back together. The very thing that was torn apart in this adoption story. But we won't get to the oneness until we name our separateness. We won't get to experience togetherness until we confront our self-centeredness. We have to know where the ashes existed before the beauty can rise. See how the problem is actually part of the solution? As Richard Rohr says, wholeness and holiness never exclude the problem from the solution. So could it be that my story and her story and their story, the adoption story, did not actually start with brokenness? Could it be that our story, that we started with beauty, out of and from love? And now we get to show and tell that kind of story with one another. So let me say this, birth parents, we need you. We need your face and voice and story and heart and light, because we aren't whole without you. Adopted persons, we need you. We need your sad and mad and confusion and diverse experiences and light, because we aren't whole without you. Adoptive parents, we need you. We need your position and platform and love and heart and light to help bridge the gaps in our collective triad, because we aren't whole without you. We need one another, don't we? So may we keep moving triadically forwards, face to face with one another, shining our light in ways that will allow us to write a shared story of good news, of healing, love, of relationship together.
Love you, ladies. Thank you again for being with us. It's a gift.
Thank you.
Appreciate y'all.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got to do it.
Yeah.
Until next time. How about we say that? How about we say until next time?
Perhaps someday we will continue this conversation and share what we need and long for and actually can do. But we're going to pause here today because we believe that naming one's position and history and hurt and harm, the hard, helps reduce its power to define us, to control us, to shame us, to write our stories. It actually frees us to reimagine. In the film How to Train Your Dragon 1, there's a moment when the main character, Hiccup, becomes enlightened and realizes that dragons are actually not his people's enemy, and that they are actually animals they can live with and have a relationship with. And so as he comes to this conclusion, he tells his community this: everything we know about them was wrong. Maybe we need to ask ourselves, has everything we've known about each of the corners of the triad been right? Have we been telling a true and good story? Has how we've acted towards one another created connectedness or disconnectedness? Pain or beauty? Have we been for and with one another or against? We are more alike than we are different. Sure, our label and names took their own form, but our identity, our true identity, shares so much humanity. I think we all forgot that. Or maybe we weren't taught or told that, because that's not the adoption story we've been telling or talking about, is it? We've been focused on getting rid of the pain and fixing the brokenness and hiding in the darkness rather than stepping into the possibility and beauty and light that is available not in spite of the pain and brokenness and darkness, but because of the pain and brokenness and darkness that lies in all of our humanity. This beauty and light will only be found and experienced in and with one another. Remember, none of the hard takes away any of the good, and none of the good takes away any of the hard. Back to How to Drain Your Dragon 1. The main character, Hiccup, is from a culture and people who have taught him that part of his role and responsibility is to kill dragons. And so he tries to muster up the courage to kill his first dragon. And when the time comes to kill his first dragon, he realizes he can't. He realizes that there's something deep inside him that wasn't made to hurt or kill. So he doesn't. He tries, but he fails. He's shamed by his community, by his father. And later, after he's built a friendship with that same dragon, Hiccup's friend Astrid asks him, "Why didn't you kill him?" And Hiccup's response was, "I didn't kill him because he looked as frightened as I was. I looked at him and I saw myself." I wonder what would happen if we intentionally practiced turning towards one another and looked at one another, at all the faces the Triad holds, and helped one another name what is true for them, what hurts, what's hard, what needs healing, what's scary, what's good and true and possible. And as we looked at one another's face and into one another's eyes, we would see and sense what's inside one another and say, "In your eyes, I see your soul, and it reflects my own." And then what would happen if we then listened to one another, to all the voices and stories and hearts, with empathy and compassion and grace, with our eyes and ears and head and heart, and let it be true. Believe that everything inside of them is true for them. And then as we turn and look and listen and learn and believe, we also responded to one another with honesty and vulnerability and courage, confessing and owning what we, our part of the Triad, has done and said and constructed and torn down, how we've contributed to this Triad and the relationships in it in hurtful and harmful ways that have created disconnection, mistrust, skepticism, despair, fear, isolation, and loneliness. And then say, "You don't have to do this alone anymore. I want to join you. I will stop trying to fix this and start being in this with you, and all of the hard and all of the mess, in the places that need and long for restoration and healing and hope. I'm so, so sorry that I forgot you, let you go, labeled you, silenced you, shamed you, dismissed you, hurled anger at you, went forwards and wrote a story of adoption without you. That was wrong, and that hurt you, and it impacts you. We need you, your face and voice and story and heart. We aren't whole without you. Can we please start over?" That's so hard to say, isn't it? But we need to say it, don't we? But wait, we don't have to. We get to. Friends, Jesus isn't in the act of adoption. He's in the people who are traveling through the process of adoption. Adoption isn't the gospel, but adoption can certainly paint a picture of the gospel. Remember, the Trinity is always respecting and relating with one another. The adoption story gets to be a story of relationship, of rupture and renewal, reminding us that in one another's eyes and souls is goodness and beauty. So let's keep traveling together, backwards when we need to, in the moment as we honor who we are and where we are, and forwards, paving a path that initiates healing and wholeness and a redemptive story worth writing.
Well, man, just a powerful, powerful conversation today. So a huge thank you to Carissa Woodwyk, to Ashley Mitchell, and to Tona for just laying it out there and sharing so vulnerably today from their perspective and their stories. And I'm going to leave it there because I think this is one of those episodes we have to kind of let breathe and stand on its own. So I hope this conversation was as helpful, informative, therapeutic, healing, powerful for you as it was for all of us who got to experience it live. For Tona Ottinger, for everyone at the ETC team, for Kyle Wright, who edits and engineers all of our audio, Tad Jewett, the creator of the music behind the ETC podcast, and everybody else on the ETC team. I'm JD Wilson, and we will see you next week on the Empowered to Connect podcast.